I know what I'm listening to. So the book is Chasing Perfection by Andy Glockner. And I put somewhere, let me see if I can find where, I think it's on the next. It's copyright 2016, right? But it's mostly covering like 2015, and before. And I think we like group messaged about it. It's a lot of it was kind of seemed like he was promoting something, or like it was like an advertisement for some of these companies that are doing some of this stuff. Oh, we lost John.
You lost me?
Oh, I don't know.
Your video cut out for a second.
Yeah.
I turned it off, but
I
turned it back on. And all right, well, it doesn't matter, I guess.
I mean, this was not my favorite book that we've ever read, but I read it, and then I did sort of have some of the concepts, like as I've been watching like a ton of League Pass, and a ton of different teams and stuff. And I think some of the concepts like came back at me in a way where I thought about them more, and my husband just had an emergency spinal surgery. So some of like the physical therapy stuff, like, and the P3 stuff, I was finding really interesting because I was kind of going through it in a different way with him at the same time, where he's just like a civilian dude, right? But they were saying, like, the physical therapists were saying, your hamstrings are like so tight. This is like part of the reason why you have a back problem, so it's sort of tied in to like that kind of idea that like, oh, your right side is so much weaker than your left side. And here's this like slew of exercises that you can do to like stave off injury and, keep your knee healthy and all that kind of stuff. So that stuff I found really interesting. I just kind of wrote out like each chapter and like summarized it on a slide. I have the Kindle too that we can pull up, but I don't know like how in depth we want to go. And I'll just like go through it chronologically, unless you guys have specific parts you want to talk about off the bat.
Yeah, I have a few notes I'd like to just briefly go over.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
I thought this book was insightful. I didn't think it was entertaining or engaging.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was hard to get through. I didn't finish. I have like 40 minutes left in the audiobook, but so I'm mostly done. The best chapter was on the P3, the motion, the kinematics. That stuff is really interesting to learn about. I took a robotics class once, and that robotics class, I was really surprised. Almost all of it was on motion and kinematics. So seeing that knowledge be like implemented in, in a sport I enjoy is interesting, because I don't normally think about kinematics outside of the context I've learned about it. But obviously, yeah, when we're dealing with people who are running and in motion, kinematics are pretty important. I thought the load management bit was pretty interesting too, because when we hear load management, it feels like an abstract thing, like, oh, load management is just taking guys off for rest. But the way they explained it as regards in certain elements of it's not just the game that's load management, it's practice, it's rest. I thought that was insightful. Travel, because we hear this stuff, the phrase all the time, but it's never really explained proper in the right context.
I totally agree. Did you get, and I think it may have been at the very end, where he talks about it might have been in the very end Warriors chapter, where he talks about the Cavs Warriors series in 2015. And he talks about the load that LeBron is carrying throughout the series.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was, well, he does this several times throughout the book, where he'll have like this whole chapter, and it'll sort of tell these like anecdotal kind of stories to like explain what he's talking about. And then there'll be some place later on in the book where somebody else will like Shane Battier will come back and say like, yeah, but all this biometric stuff is kind of a violation of privacy. You know, like there'll be someone else later on who will say something relevant about what he's previously explained. And that for me was an interesting throwback to the load management stuff. And I think it's extremely relevant in this season of super teams that are built around aging and injury prone superstars.
Yeah.
Because every time it's like a cascading effect of if you have your number one star go out with an injury, right? Then the load or, you know, the usage or however you want to term it becomes that much more on your remaining star. Now, can you stack enough stars on a team to avoid that becoming problematic? Maybe the Clippers did that. We'll see, right? Or maybe, you know, maybe these stars won't follow their normal injury trajectory this season, which I think is unlikely because most of them are in their 10th year at least of their career.
I'd like to believe they get lucky at least one season where the Stars are one and both of them are finally healthy for once. I think if it's going to happen, it'd be this season.
Those are really great. I agree with you. I found those two to be the most compelling parts of the book. What did you call it?
Kinematics.
And that's the same thing as kinesiology, right?
Yeah, it's all kinesiology, but the kinematics are the like mechanics of it. What was the other phrase you used? There's kinesiology.
Yeah. He uses something else in here, but I can't remember what it is. But it's
so kinesiology is the study of it, and kinematics is the like math or mechanics of it.
Got you.
Yeah.
And I know, like, it was interesting too. Like, I had read the part about that, and then on the same day that the article came out about James Harden, like he wanted to travel with the team, but they were like, no, you can't travel with the team because all your tracking stuff is set up we didn't bring it with us, right? So if you want to train, you have to go to the home training, whatever, building, because that's where all your tracking stuff is, right? So I thought that was kind of interesting, in the sense that it's built up a lot more at this point where teams are using it regularly. And I think it's more, I know like in the bubble too, a lot of the players had those rings, those aura rings or whatever, where they were like, it was like tracking their biometrics in the bubble. I don't know why in the bubble would be that much different. I mean, I remember it being funny because Jimmy Butler drank like millions of cups of espresso all the time. Like he's a mad coffee fiend. And so people were like speculating that his aura ring was going to be, whacked out, which I thought was funny. Anything else in your notes, Kev?
Yeah, I have a few other things in the notes. Well, but the biggest takeaway for me is I've always been fascinated by the data analytics of basketball. Like if I wasn't in my current job role in my major, if I had to redo college, I'd probably go into data analytics. And especially nowadays, like when we were talking about all these AI stuff, that's all data science, data analytics, the machine learning, crunching these numbers. Basketball is one of the most well-known applications of data science. And it's interesting to see just how important this stuff is. a lot of this stuff wouldn't have been possible in the past. Like they mentioned Second Spectrum, like a pick and roll compilation. So
Yeah.
that's a machine learning application where they'd scan the video and chop all the parts that are relevant. You'd be able to search that. That's incredible stuff. That's like really advanced technology that we're seeing get more accessible thanks to this AI revolution.
And I think, I mean, sadly, he used the Sacramento Kings as like the example of how information can like not reach its end point accurately, you know, or like the human element fails at a certain point of the system. Like,
I think he meant to use the Kings as a good example, and then he had all this information to present, and he didn't want to waste it. So it's like, but they screwed it all up.
Everything fell off a cliff.
Yeah.
Pete Sandro, looking back on this, like when I started that chapter and I heard the words Pete Sandro, no,
God damn it.
This is not going to end well. I know already.
So classic, man. I thought that discussion, as far as it being like a disclaimer on just trying to like blanket everything in analytics, like I thought the discussion that he had about it was really good. And like I said, I also thought that then later on when he talks to Shane Battier, I thought Shane Battier had really interesting stuff to say, you know, about Shane Battier, Jeff Van Gundy. Okay, like I watched a lot of 90s basketball. So I know Jeff Van Gundy from being the coach of the Knicks, you know, and being a coach, not being a broadcaster. And I loved him. And Shane Battier talks about how Jeff Van Gundy was really good at diluting stuff, right? And like bringing it down to like its simplest form and then presenting it in a way that made a lot of sense to the players. And like, I know I've heard other stories about him just sitting the team down and going, I need you to do this, this, and this. I need you to do this, this, and this. And I know it's not completely analytics, but I think that was a big part of the message, is that unless people understand the message that you're presenting and you can weed out like what is relevant and from what is irrelevant, all of this data collection it's great, but it's not going anywhere, right? It's stuck in the pool where you collected it.
There's a reason they call IT information technology, because data is just numbers, but the actual useful information is what matters.
Yeah,
that's so I think the biggest takeaway from this book is that everyone uses data analytics and these big numbers and stuff. But the difference between a good team, like everyone uses it, but the difference between them is how well they convey it.
Yes.
Like, data analytics is just a part of the modern game. It always will be. And pretending it isn't, like pretending that one team is an analytics driven team is lying to yourself. But there's a difference, you know, conveying information, the human element of it is the most important.
Yeah. And that consistency and coordination of like from the very top, you know, the owner to the front office to the, like, there has to be some level of consistency and coordination that remains, you know, that's, and also I think longevity, like he uses the Spurs over and over again. I think we always look at the Spurs as like this successful organization over, you know, millions of years. Like, does that mean they've been winning the whole time? Not really. It means that they've had this like extremely solid human chain from the top down, right? Yeah. Anything else?
Well, that's all my notes.
John,
I have a couple of things.
Thoughts?
I have a couple of things, not much, so I think I can get them all out pretty quickly here. I hope. Like Kevin was talking about, you know, I wonder how the generative AI that we've seen recently with ChatGPT and Bard is gonna impact. You know, because the right now they say on page 35 that The other thing we can do is because we have a computer that understands the data, we've also done some algorithms that allow the computer to understand the video. So, a generative AI that can understand the video, can understand the plays, and learn how to explain these plays, and then of course it says, I think above that it says, or I think I didn't put that in my thread, but there's another paragraph where they talk about they can look at a 10,000 plays in a couple of minutes or seconds or whatever it would take, a lot quicker than any human could look at it, even the best X's and O's mind in the world, person who knows the most ball couldn't do it as fast as generative AI. Maybe a little bit better than generative AI, but not as fast for sure. All that data. So that's interesting. This is whatever, I guess 7 years ago, but more like 8 years ago. And
Right.
Now we have generative AI out in the open. So I'm sure Daryl Morey jumped on that to get his own version of ChatGPT for his team. And
I wonder if generative AI, I'm not sure how important it'll be in general because they have all these models and stuff. So, I mean, they have all these machine learning stuff. So that might not be super important, but if you have players that are interested in learning this stuff, they don't have to go to their video guy. They could theoretically open one of these. If they made a generative AI basketball thing, it might make it more accessible to the individual players. But I think the existing chain of data analytics people probably not using the generative AI stuff.
I'm interested. I mean, I think you can go too far with it too, right? Just like anything. Like this is, I mean, every book that we've read, every analytics book that we've read, and including this one, I would say has this disclaimer of this information is extremely useful to verify things that you already know or evaluate things that you're trying out, right? But using it as the answer to all things without also eye test and legacy knowledge and all of that stuff is kind of pointless. That's not going to, it's just a part of the puzzle of, player evaluation and all of that kind of stuff. So I think that's an important, the chat. I mean, and let me also say, I don't know shit about ChatGPT. So I have no idea if it would, Blake was saying that he has his, Snoop read his business papers to him with ChatGPT. I think I'm probably more interested in that kind of novelty use of it, than in could Muggsy Bogues beat Victor Wembanyama by going through his legs? That's the kind of thing I would look up on it. I would be bad at it, I think.
Okay. Well, I don't know. It's just conversational. It just go over answers your question and just conversationally tells you an over answer your question.
The thing with generative AI is it basically, AI in general is, think of it as processing. You have one input and you want it to theoretically get to your correct output. So generative AI, it basically tries to predict the output you want. It has a big problem with lying to you, hallucinations. So don't use it as a search engine or
hallucinations.
So don't use it as
it adds extra information or
it places false information into its output because it thinks that's what you want.
Yeah.
It has no basis for truth other than the results it's seen so far. So but it doesn't fact check or anything. So I that's the kind of thing is right now it's not reliable for any real business application.
Yeah.
So, okay. But next thing I saw was there's a section on the Spurs and how I guess in 2013-14, so the 14 season, really 14 playoffs, they played their starters not as much as you would expect, and they played their bench a lot more than you would expect, or not a lot more, but they played them a lot, and they had the same record that they would have had that they had in prior years. Or I'm losing a lot of the information there. I just had this one highlighted in my Twitter thread, but Yeah, they had the same, pretty much the same record or a good record, you know. And I think that's most important, obviously, to be healthy in the playoffs and to be, you know, have enough energy in the playoffs to be able to do well there. So, I mean, if you can get a good enough record in the regular season, I don't even care that much about the playoffs. I mean, we saw last season, I
Well,
think,
and
with how
was there,
many.
I mean, I think part of that, I just tried to pull it up, but I don't know where it is in the book exactly. But I mean, part of their theoretical or theory going into doing that was, yeah, like you said, be ready for the playoffs, but also because their stars were getting older. And so they wanted to like decrease the load of their stars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I,
Well,
I think, yeah, that'll be interesting applied to this season if we see something like that.
yeah.
I
It
mean,
was
I
on page
know
50, the 50s, the early 50s is
the
what it
early
was at.
50s.
Yeah, 54 is where my highlight comes from, page 54.
I wish this stupid
48 through whatever, 50 something.
48. Oh yeah. See, I think mine might be different because that's where, let's see, with every NBA team having equal access to raw SportVU data.
Oh, I'm on the Kindle, and I don't know if it's an old version.
Yeah, I am
I bought this
too.
book a long time ago.
Oh,
Actually.
except in the areas of player health and wellness, which is why, according to a growing number of NBA personnel, developments in that area will dwarf the current evolution of on-court strategy. See, I wonder how outdated his discussion of load management is. Like, I feel like that discussion about the way that the Spurs, that we know load management started with the Spurs, right? They're sitting guys out and then using them less minutes than normal. Like one of them, I think in here, he says like they sat, I think, Tim Duncan out one night and the reason was old, right? Like it's not, they're load managing, right? And but I wonder how much what he says here has changed to now, because the whole philosophy of it is that like this kind of concept that guys playing more is a way bigger load. But then I think there started being like the more of the conversation last season, maybe partially due to like the Kings being successful. I know like Paul George had said it, is like practicing more and playing more regularly might actually preserve you from injuries because your body is prepared for the load, right?
Yeah,
So
you're
there's
in
some
better
happy
condition.
medium there that I don't think they actually have completely quantified yet,
Like all scientific thing, the stance, the like not all of this is like truth, right? Like
Yes.
there's various opinions upon it. And back in 2014, 2015, there was no opinion because the only opinion was the Spurs coaching team, right? They're the only one
Yeah.
doing it. So now that we've seen it across a lot of teams, we're seeing various different opinions and stances on it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they have so much more data on this stuff than they did back then. Like the book was talking about biometrics, who should own the biometrics and information about how the player should own that stuff and how it's if they have these like rings and stuff, it's a violation of their own privacy or whatever. But I'm sure they're getting a lot more health data, irrespective
Yeah.
of. So I'm sure the load management analytics has changed a lot since now, and I'm sure there's a lot of stronger opinions on it in these teams than there are now. I'm
I mean, and it
sure.
must like I just feel like I maybe this is totally wrong, but it seems like the league's superstars are playing older and older, like skewing older and older. Maybe that's not totally true. Like obviously Kareem played forever. He was like 41 or something when he stopped playing. But
I think players' primes have definitely extended, right?
I agree. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to. I think that's what I was trying to say there is that, and so I mean, what consideration do you need to give to somebody who's 35 over somebody who's 20? You know what I mean? Like those are two really different things in
Mm-hmm.
physiology.
Yeah.
And so he doesn't talk about that a lot in here, aside from the Spurs stuff where he does talk about age. But he also, I think the stuff that he talks about Kyle Korver too. He talks about Kyle Korver becoming the perfected player, right? And like there's all these different factors that went into that. But as Kyle Korver's career went on, he got better and better because of all these different factors. Partially it was because of his work ethic, right? And some of it was random, like he had some random injury that helped him obtain like the perfect shooting form. And then he went to P3 after an injury, and he learned how to like be more balanced. He learned this, sit back on your heels thing from KD. So obviously age can make you a lot better too, but can it make you able to sustain higher loads? And that's the part that I think is questionable. Again, this is like a conversation that's happening right now with the Lakers too, where they're like, oh, we're going to play LeBron 30 minutes a game. And like, that's all we're going to play him. And like, he hasn't played 30 minutes a game in any game because they can't win with him playing 30 minutes. They have to have him play 40 minutes, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, we'll see what happens, right? But it's like, will that be detrimental to the team in the long run? Will he be able to maintain that load for the entirety of the season? There's other stuff that factors in. Obviously, will they make trades? All that kind of stuff too. But the fact remains that he's playing a shit ton of minutes, so they can barely eke out wins.
He's playing out of his mind too, like MVP caliber. At what age? 37, 38, something like that?
I think he's 38.
Yeah, we've never seen anything like it. Everyone his age is barely in the league at this point. The Vince Carter, Dirk Nowitzki's, like when you're in your high 30s, this is basically never seen before.
Yeah, he's 38.
Someone who's be able to play at that caliber at this age.
Yeah. So I didn't mean to bring the Lakers up. I hate talking about the Lakers. But I do, I did think about it relative. There's a lot of, I'm on Threads and not Twitter. So on Threads, there's not a million NBA fans. There's just, I don't know, there's a few hundred that I've found. And so a lot of them are like Lakers or Warriors, because those are the major concentration of fan bases. So I just like listen in on their conversations sometimes via thread. And that was like a major concern of a lot of the Lakers threadies that I
are they as toxic as Lakers spaces are?
No, not at all. Like when De'Aaron got hurt that game, when he went down, like I don't have a lot of mutuals that are Lakers fans. I have like probably 15 Lakers mutual fans, and every single one of them was like, oh my God, please don't let him be hurt. Like they were all super cool. Like they weren't dickheads, and they didn't get personal about it. And I'd like to say that's the same for the Warriors fans, but I had to unfollow a bunch of them, not because they were toxic though, just because I couldn't really handle we play the Warriors like so many fucking times.
It's like 12 times in 17 games.
They have to do that weird showboat shit after every single game where it's like, oh, rock the baby, night, too small, what the hell ever all that stupid stuff is. Like, you won a regular season game. Like, you don't have to have a celebration dance. You know what I mean? It's just so annoying. So anyways, I unfollowed them because of that, not because they were toxic though. And there's no spaces there. So, I'm sure that it could get toxic if given the opportunity. Yeah. And there's no Russ there right now, which helps. Go ahead, John. I think we got off track there.
Yeah. Next thing I had was depth. Okay. So he went through a lot of prospects in his prospect section, like trying to pick out prospects and going like to age 13 or 14 at USA Basketball. But a lot of the people he wrote about, we have the benefit of hindsight, and a lot of them didn't really. And you guys may disagree with me on some of these players, but a lot of these players didn't turn out to be all-stars at least. And that's like Kid Gilchrist, Tony Roten, Jabari Parker, Jalil Okafor, Otyus Jones, Justice Winslow. I mean, they're NBA players, some of them, but most of them. But they just kind of didn't work out. And they kind of didn't work out as they were hoped to, like being in USA Basketball when they were in their teens. But the way I saw it is that maybe that, when you're in your teens, obviously athleticism shows before skill is developed, like great skill is developed. That's my theory. So like, these guys were great athletes in their teens, and they were able to just like annihilate teams with their athleticism on USA Basketball. And they were developing their skills, but then other players, like, for example, Steph Curry or whoever else is really skillful, could develop skills later on in their career, and by the time they get to the NBA or a few years into it, they're the better player.
I'm so curious. Like, I really wonder if he were to write this book today, who would be the most perfected player? Wouldn't it be Steph Curry? Like, who has evolved the most over their career? Or it could be LeBron, or it could be, people who have really Sprawl Ball did this too, where they took like LeBron and like, here's how he started as a player. And then he figured out that he needed to like become a part of the 3-point game, right? So he figured out how to play make for shooters. Or like Steph, like having bad ankles, like he completely changed his shooting, right? Even though it was already good, he still broke his entire form and rebuilt it and became even better. So I guess I wonder, like, is there more perfected players than Kyle Korver? Kyle Korver can't be the penultimate perfected player, can he? I'm not trying to say Kyle Korver was a bad player. I'm just saying
he was perfect in what he was doing.
Right.
It was what they were trying to do. I think Steph is as good as like you can get in regards to off ball like threat, right? And but he has an on ball game as well as that. So
yeah,
it's really hard to. Jokic will absolutely have to be mentioned. And
that's a good one too.
Yeah.
Well, I think what he meant by it was perfected player was to maximize all their avenues for them to be as good as they can be. Kyle was not the best player, obviously, at any time in his career, but he was, in his guy's opinion, he was the most perfected, the best, made the most of his gifts, and learned new things, and did the health stuff at San Diego or wherever, or Santa Barbara, or wherever it was. And did the health stuff there, put his family there, did like every summer.
Whatever, like weird. And then at the very end, he like goes, and then he goes on some kind of like whacked out millionaire like kayaking trip or some shit. Like what?
Swim with the sharks or something like that. Something crazy.
That is like okay, I'm from Santa Barbara. It's like the whitest, richest town in the world. It's super beautiful, but it was cracking me up that he was like describing how to get to P3 from the wharf. Like what? Like,
that was ridiculous.
I don't need directions. Like, and then like the very end where he talks about how Kyle Korver went on some like kind of weird kayaking trip to the Channel Islands, which that is like the whitest shit I've ever heard in my life. Like that's so Santa Barbara. Like I can't even. Anyways.
Okay, probably in my opinion, my most important thing, because I always.
I did want to loop back on the discussion about prospects. I mean, there are guys that are analytics darlings that have really worked out in the NBA. So Halliburton obviously was one. Desmond Bain was another analytics darling. He's been working out. I mean, there's a lot of guys, prospects that analytics really loves. I mean, and they've worked out. And even in this book, there was 3 guys, Westbrook, Harden, and Vucevic, that were mentioned in regards to like prospects that are analytics darlings that like were picked because of the analytics. So I'm not sure if this book was entirely out of busts, but yeah, there was a lot. There was a lot of busts here.
Well, I would say USA Basketball were those guys that I mentioned. There were USA Basketball picks, and I don't know if USA Basketball was using analytics to pick those guys. I don't know.
I
can't
don't
remember
think so, but
if they said they were. But
a lot of people are putting the blame on AAU basketball nowadays in regards to
Yeah.
like American prospects not being amazing. If we're going to talk about USA Basketball, Chet Holmgren right now would be the guy to talk about. He was USA Basketball guy, and look at him now.
Yeah.
Most
important thing I think that I want to talk about is bring up the book is on page 93. My book at least, but it's about guys that don't look good that still perform well. So, I mean, if you can find a star that doesn't look good but he performs well according to analytics, the data, then information, then great. But I mean, whatever, role players, whatever. It's like Moneyball, you know. If you guys read Moneyball, there's this dude in there that has this he looks like he's a guy that watches baseball on his couch and drinks beers and potato chips for 5 hours a day, you know. But he gets on base percentage is really good, and he gets a lot. He gets a lot of walks. He gets a good decent number of hits. He's an effective player. He's not going to be a star perhaps, but doesn't look like. And if you saw the movie too, like the scouts are like, oh man, this is a great looking guy. He's tall. He's got a great stance. He's got, he runs real fast, you know, like all these things that like, they look good to the scouts, but do they actually perform well in the games? Like they get on the base.
Yeah.
So like to basketball, you know, similar thing, you know, if the guy they have, but my example in my thread is John Gillen. I never heard of him, but he's probably, I think he's in college basketball. But he doesn't look like a good defender. But the stats show that from what they're able to tell that people don't score on him.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's kind of like.
No, it's I think Sasha's the perfect example. I think everybody was like, oh, Sasha's going to be a terrible defender. Like, he's horrible. And then you actually, it looks awful. It does not look like it's working. But I guarantee you it's working. You start digging into his advanced stats. He has one of the best deflection rates on the team. I
think this is more about our team than it does Sasha, though, unfortunately.
It doesn't look right, but it's right now. You had the benefit of getting him from a totally different league where he had to prove himself, right? So that's kind of a different thing. But I totally get what you're saying is finding those. And I think Desmond Bain is probably the perfect example of it, where people are like, ew, he doesn't have the right body. He's not, how is he supposed to shoot with Tyrannosaurus Rex arms or whatever? But it's he does, it works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sadly, not enough to help them win, but at the moment.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, for sure. And I was just searching through this too, because this book had notated, I wish I could find the quote, but they were saying when the Kentucky experiment chapter, which is this hunt for future perfected players, he says that the stats that are most valued by the NBA that are thought to translate the best at this time, right, are rebounding percentage and blocks. And rebounding percentage, blocks, and assists. And I don't think that's true anymore. I think that the stats that people look at, or it was really fashionable to look at blocks and steals for a while, stocks, right? And I think that's even changed more now. I don't know what the new sort of hip stat to look at is, but
I'm pretty sure that blocks and rebounds probably still convey really well. If you're good at,
yeah, I totally agree. I don't think those are a bad thing to look at, and assists as well. I mean, those are great things to look at. I think it's more of a matter of how much are you weighting them in your evaluation?
Yeah.
If you have to put a weight
I remember that for prospects, if you're trying to figure out how good a shooter is, you should be looking at the free throw shots instead of the
Yeah,
3-point shots, because 3 points don't particularly translate well into the NBA game.
right.
I'm sure there's a lot like that
Yeah,
where the raw box numbers, points and stuff, don't translate at all.
right. Well,
I'm
and so much of it is opponent, right? I
yeah.
mean, it like I'm trying to think of Marquise Noel, right? He's like this tiny 5'9" guard from New York who's playing on Toronto's G League team.
Yeah.
Like he's freaking awesome, but throw him in the in the NBA draft combine, he's still super fun, but he's too small. Like, and now, have there been great NBA players that are too small? Absolutely. Like, I'm a huge fan of those guys. Like, I love all those guys. I love, Muggsy, Earl Boykins, like, Nate, like, yeah. But you have to be so exceptional to overcome an impediment like that because everyone else is bigger, right? Because of what your opponent is like. And that's what's really hard to evaluate, in my opinion, from league to league or from college to NBA.
I wonder how the new leagues. I'm sure they have to rebuild all of this in regards to like translating from G League, translating from the NBL, translating from
Yeah.
Euro League. The games, there's a lot more places players are coming from now. So I'm
Yeah.
sure that part of the job is quite a bit harder.
Yeah. Or then you see somebody like Wemby it's like, you just watch him play. It doesn't really matter who he's playing with or where he's playing. I mean, I think there is some like, oh, it's not going to translate maybe just because he's so thin. But on the other side of it, it's like he can do shit that I've never seen somebody like that doing.
Yeah.
So that translates regardless, right?
Yeah.
How do you stop that? You can't. Like the only thing you can do is like do something totally wacky. Like, I mean, I guess like that comes down to geometry, right? It's the geometry.
He has an 8-foot wingspan. How are you gonna like? He can block anything. Like the range, his zone of blocking is just longer than people expect.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to get the matchup so that he's on somewhere on the court you want him to be. The best place the best of the worst of the bad places.
Yeah.
You want him to be. If you could try to get them to put him there. Get Popovich to put him there on a possession,
Well, and also establishing and using his gravity, right? So that was like, I watched all the Spurs games so far, where in like the first half of most of them, they have not specifically gone to Wemby for any points. They just rely on him to get rebounds and make his own points off those. And then they'll start feeding him later on in the games. Because I think what he's trying to do is they're playing like, I think, all read and react, first of all. But secondly, I think what they're trying to do is negate Wemby's gravity until the second half, and then teams have to adjust to it. But that's totally theoretical, obviously. It's fun as hell to watch.
Yeah, he's so much fun to watch. I've just been thinking the only way you can really get by Wemby is either you blow by him because he's kind of slow-footed. He's a 7-footer. So I mean he's nimble for 7'4", but he's slower than a De'Aaron Fox. So if ever great cutter, they'll still be able to score.
He's just so freaking long though. Like he blocked a shot he was like basically on the perimeter, and the shot went up, and he blocked it in front of the basket.
Yeah.
Like he can just get there so much faster than anybody else, right?
And then I'm assuming like it seems like big size, like physical play kind of bothers him too. But that's the only thing.
My theory is that like I know that in FIBA, Kenneth Lofton kind of dominated him. Like so my theory is you got to play like a thick dude or a tiny dude. Like there was a couple of minutes in the Suns game where there was like a whole game happening that was too low for Wemby to reach. Like it was happening like underneath him, and he couldn't get into the action because it was literally too low.
I think that's probably something he could adjust to. That's just a
I
scouting
do
report
too.
thing,
Yeah,
right?
no, that's absolutely. I mean, he's like 5 games into a career. Like, yeah, absolutely. But it's weird. That's my favorite thing. Is like weird basketball. So I think it's really interesting to watch and speculate about stuff like that. Sorry, I took you completely off course again, John.
No, it's all right. I'm done. I'm done with my stuff.
Oh, I don't even really want to go through all mine because it's too much. Like, and you guys kind of hit on everything I think that I
just want to briefly cycle through the slides.
Yeah. I mean, the first part is just the intro. He was just kind of, what is he, talking about? He talked about like the international, how international competition, can like spur on change within the game. He talked about the KD thing about the heels, like Kyle Korver asking KD, like, well, what do you do when you're in a slump? And KD said, I find my heels. I feel my heels when I'm shooting. Or let me see. Sorry if I'm tabbed out. So I was talking to Kevin Durant. I ask people from time to time, good shooters, when you're off, what is the thing you go back to? Not that I ask everybody, just from time to time, you just talk to someone and ask. And Kevin Durant said, I need to be in my heels. So when I'm in my heels, I'm stronger. I want my heels to be solid on the ground as I'm shooting. That was something that they, he went back to again in Kyle Korver chapter, where he was talking about how Kyle using that technique actually like helped him with his bad knee. Like it started fixing his knee when he would like lean back on his heels when he was shooting.
Yeah,
and
that stuff is
better. So the fact that they were thrown together by like international competition sort of spurred on something for a singular player, right? And then he also talks about how they steal plays from other teams. Like they were doing like a bogut slingshot on Australia, I think was doing a bogut slingshot where they'd have somebody come around and they would use bogut as like a leverage, and then they would sling off of him, and they were going too fast so nobody could tag them. And so they were talking about how like I think it was the Warriors stole that when they got Bogut. So that stuff was interesting, and again, he talks about it later with the younger kids going to FIBA and being an international ball. And it was fun watching like Chet, Wemby, Kenneth Lofton Jr. all competed against each other in 2019. Like that was one of those teams that you can look back on and go like, oh, interesting. Like, was there stuff there that would have, that'll work now kind of thing. And then I thought like, I just, it's more of like an anecdotal kind of book, I thought, than he's not like describing the exact technologies or the exact systems. It's more like using like stories of the stars to like explain them, which I think is both like effective and not effective in some way.
I mean, I don't think you can go that detailed into this kind of stuff, though.
Especially if it's proprietary.
Yeah,
right?
all the stuff, all the real information is all held by the teams. They don't want to share any of it. Which brings like there's a lot of things that are, I hate that so much is just like private knowledge. This is not just a sports analytics issue, but just like it extends to so many things in life, and it's all really frustrating to me.
Well, it's funny because like I think there's some lawsuit going on right now. I think it's the Knicks are suing the Raptors, or the opposite. I don't know which way it goes. Actually, I think it's the Raptors are suing the Knicks. I don't know, because one of their coaches went to a new team and took like team data, but the team data that they took is like shit you can download from Synergy.
Yeah.
So it's just the team profile that they took, but they're suing saying like, oh, you guys have proprietary information about our team, right?
Yeah.
Which it crosses a weird line too of like, it's a coach who used to work in your office. So of course we do. We have intellectual property, right? Of this person's brain who actually worked for you. But at the same time, I think they're looking at it like you have something material that we can actually sue you over. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. Because they were saying like the lawsuit is kind of weird. Like, how can you sue somebody for using a tool that all the teams pay for?
Yeah.
Right. And this is stuff that you could just look up yourself if you had the right prompts. But they're basically suing because this person took their prompts with them. And okay, so then the next part is the history of modern basketball analytics. I found this chapter pretty interesting too, mostly because he goes over a lot of people that I had not heard of before.
Yeah.
And like at this point, we've read so many analytics books that I'm always surprised when the history part is different, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was really interesting. Like the Lewis Guth part was interesting, where he, again, let me point out, Moses Malone is in this book. I have no idea why Moses Malone is in every single book, but he taught where Louis Guth like figured out that Moses Malone's rebounding would fit perfectly on the 76ers, right? So whatever Louis Guth's like system was that he was figuring that out with, I don't think that's like that complicated. Like they need rebounding. Here's the best rebounder in the game. Hey, you could probably get him. You know, it's not that far of a stretch. And then he just named off a bunch of other guys, like the Dean Smith stuff I thought was really interesting. So Dean Smith was sort of the originator of the PPP stuff and pace adjusted and attempted to make some single player value metrics. And then Bill James is the baseball one. So he's the Moneyball one, right? But the response to James was like Roland Beach and Dean Oliver, etc. So, and then it kind of went into people that we have talked and read about in other books. But some of these metrics that they're coming up with, I thought were really interesting. Here's the Moses Malone stuff. And I can't remember whose this one was. Pythagorean winning percentage, which used run differential to establish what a team's record should be versus what it actually was, and win shares, which was a catch-all statistic designed to gauge a player's contribution to his team's success, allowing for cross-position and cross-era comparisons of players. So that's like based on the Bill James Moneyball stuff, but it was for basketball, right? And then the data collection, like we've already talked about all this stuff. The SportVU is probably like the biggest advance in being able to collect a lot of this data too, like all the pick and roll stuff. Obviously, you could sit there and go through play by play if you wanted to, and pick it out that way. But the SportVU and being able to pick it out visually is really was a massive innovation, right? And then now they're actually looking at introducing Hawkeye onto basketball courts as well. I just read an article about Hawkeye like stacking on SportVU, and Hawkeye would be more like they use for tennis, like it'd be more about the speed of stuff and individual kind of impact and statistics that way. And then all the company stuff, Second Spectrum, the Second Spectrum stuff, I thought like got a little dramatic. Like, I don't know, he kind of dissed them at the end of it a little bit, where he said there was like some drama of like employees leaving and blaming each other. And I don't know, that was bizarre. I think all teams use this stuff now, right? They all use Synergy. They maybe even don't have an in-house guy crunching all this stuff because they don't need it. It's being done for them.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a few organizations trying to make this all in-house. That's how companies are. They don't want to. They see the bill and they don't want to pay the bill. They'll hire
Yeah,
someone to try
maybe
to make it.
so. Or like it talks about how some of them tried to like keep other clubs from using it, right? Or like make it so they couldn't use it.
Yeah.
But it's like a service, So I don't know. I think that's such a complicated part of like the data revolution, is that it's essentially like civilian, and so all these things that are created are a product, right? So your product has to be efficacious if you want to sell it, obviously. And then the Sacramento stuff, the Sacramento's journey to Wonk and back is illustrated in an exploration of how analytics move through an organization and how many things can derail them. And he just went through all the D'Alessandro stuff, and I think that ended right after Mike Malone was fired, right? Is that where that ended?
Well, I think he did kind of follow through into Vladdy's hiring.
Oh yeah,
He's leaving. Mullen left, and
Yeah, and then he sort of left it like, we'll see what happens now.
Oh, I think even Dean Oliver being shoved out the door and Roland Beach coming in.
Yeah, and Roland Beach coming in. Yeah,
so that was a little bit further along too, but
yeah. So that did not go well. I don't know if you heard that. And then the Stan Van Gundy quote, "No, I like the analytics." I thought the part where they talked to Stan Van Gundy about, well, first of all, I think Stan Van Gundy is such an interesting character in the NBA, pantheon of coaching, because he's been on both sides of the analytics. Like we've read about him with the Orlando team that shot tons and tons of threes, the Dwight Howard Orlando team that was really good. And then he was the coach of that horrible Detroit team that was in the other book that was so bad, and they had 0 3-point shooting. So I think he's interesting in that sense, but I also think like what he had to say about analytics was interesting. And they talked about how he was at one of the Sloan business conferences and sort of pushed back on a lot of it. And so, no, I like the analytics. I think analytics are very helpful. I think there are some people who think the analytics are everything. I don't think that. I think it's a big part of the puzzle. I think you have to give a lot of credence to what the analytics say, but it can't be the only thing you have. So I thought that was good. And then we kind of went through like, the load management stuff. I think we really talked about that. Importance of depth. And then he went through like the 76ers and using a good system with bad players in it. And of course, Houston, which is in like every single book that we read, the Harden Houston stuff. And then the Battier, so Battier understands from a player standpoint how potentially harmful this could be. And I feel like I cut off part of that somehow. Sorry. Where was I? Oh, so Battier understands from a player standpoint how potentially harmful this could be. For every instance where a player can stave off injury or find out some predisposition to a potentially lethal condition like Marfan, there are situations where data could be used against a player, and many don't want all that personal information in the hands of their employers. Like I think that's a really good point to make, especially since we know like a lot of players like smoke pot, or smoke pot after games, or like so there's a lot of things that employers could find out about employees that's proprietary, or that's private and personal, and that they shouldn't be able to know. So I just the trend is definitely towards like maximizing all this biometric data. I know that like even the practice, the OKC account, like, put out pictures of their practice team, and they all had like what looked like a sports bra basically, but it's like a data collection that they wore while they were working out. And like I said, like even the Sixers were like, no, you can't travel with the team because all of your data collection is at the practice facility, right? So
Yeah, I mean, the biometrics is one of those things that have kind of gotten democratized since this book is written. Like, you know, everyone has these like Apple Watches that are like $300 and has all these bajillion sensors. So I think a lot of this stuff has been a little normalized lately. Just having
agree.
more data information.
Yeah.
But this conversation is still interesting because this data should belong to the players.
I also think that it becomes like an issue potentially where like the Players Association could step in and say like, we're not okay with you knowing this, this, and this. You know what I mean? Like, or I mean, that's the best kind of example I can think of. I feel like it's information. So, okay. So I have a 23andMe account, right? I put my DNA into a 23andMe account. Now, if you want to go further than that, say you want to like register your DNA to get matched against like a missing person, you have to upload it to a different place, right? You can't do that through like nobody has the proprietary, or they don't have access to 23andMe. And when you sign up for 23andMe, you do not sign anything that says like I give permission to share my DNA, you know, in the case of missing persons or whatever like that. You would take your raw DNA that they translate for you and you would upload it to like another place. I think it's called GED match or something like that. And it lists it out in a different way so that genealogists, when they're looking for like Jane and John Does and stuff like that, they can go find it in that database if you have submitted it there, right? Because that is the specific purpose of that database. And when you submit there, you sign something saying, I'm submitting this. I'm
sure this is all in the contracts that you guys sign, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure these teams want this information, so they'll include it in their contracts, right?
No, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, and then the reason why I'm going off on this is because I have a son who has a genetic disorder, and 23andMe constantly pings me to trace this. And I'm like, that is his fucking medical record. I am not like, and the pharmacological company, the pharmacology companies are working on cures for all of these things right now. They're working on DNA-based cures. So that information can actually be not just valuable in terms of informationally, but it can be economically valuable. It can cause prejudice against somebody. Like, so I think it's a really, really complex consideration, especially since we are on the eve of like, we just treated the first pandemic with a DNA-based vaccine, right? I mean, so we're on the very eve of what I think will be an explosive use of this knowledge, right, of genomic science to treat and understand, especially diseases better. But in terms of players, you know, if you have some random chromosomal anomaly that doesn't make that much difference, you wouldn't want that to necessarily be public, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, sorry for that's getting really wonky about that. And then, the load management stuff was just fascinating, interesting. I think it'll be really relevant for this season. Like I said, this was just a quote about, you know, he just picks random numbers, but where he says like, that's what he could do. That he could do like 5,000. And it's like an individual metric for each player, which I don't think I was understanding as much either. But it has all that other information sort of embedded in it, like age, injury history. Probably, I mean, I wonder if efficacy figures into it at all. Like, this guy is phenomenal when he plays 32 minutes, you know what I mean? But if he plays 35, shit starts going wonky or whatever it is, who knows? But I do think that the discussion was really fascinating. And then it sort of like increased my understanding of it's an individual metric per player, and it's including all of these external factors, not just their time on the floor, but their practice time, their travel time, etc. I feel like we talked about that pretty well already. I wonder if I don't think I did, but so this is the quote that Stan Van Gundy said about Tom Thibodeau too, which again, I thought like was really interesting and revealing, is kind of pushing back on this idea that like all load management is good and like we know what's best for our players. But he's saying, like, I think it's one of those things that when people get on a guy like Tom Thibodeau about overplaying people, the part they're missing out is that they're assuming that if those guys did less, they would still execute at both ends the same way. And I don't buy that. One of the reasons they're as good as they are and execute the way they are is that they spend more time at it than other people. So I thought that was just a really interesting, you know, like you don't want to stop practicing because someone's at their load if they still don't understand the concept. Like, you need your team to understand the concepts you're pushing, right?
Well, it's kind of a balancing act then, right? It's got a balance between overloading them and not getting the experience, the reps to do the plays or just know each other well enough to play well together. Yeah.
I think there's so like Tom Thibodeau still like is probably the most criticized coach in the league for overplaying his guys. And then also Nick Nurse gets it a ton. So it'll be interesting to see because Nick Nurse is a Philly coach now, and there's a new coach in Toronto. So like if I were parsing out that data, I would try and like identify the difference between the maximum minutes the Toronto guys were playing and what they're playing now, and if there's a difference in efficacy, right, in efficiency, and in injuries and stuff like that, because that's the other thing about Nick Nurse's Toronto team is Pascal, OG, you know, I mean, they both have suspect in injury histories. Not suspect, but they weren't always healthy. Let's put it that way. So did their load affect that? I don't know. And then now all the future perfected players, they did all the Kentucky stuff with the platooning and stuff, which made me think of what Mike Brown was doing in the preseason for the Kings, where he was just bringing in five guys, like, and they were not mixing them up or like staggering them at all. And I think he was doing that on purpose to evaluate, you know, the effect of it. But anyways, I mean, that was just kind of interesting.
Yeah, platooning is interesting. I think it's just interesting to see different stuff, you know?
Yeah.
Like teams trying different schemes, and because it's, you know, good for the game to see if things work or not.
I mean, again, in the college stuff, there's a lot of talk about being able to use and evaluate. Like, they have even less money than the NBA, right? So, and they have a wider range of talent. So if you have a coach who's looking at data that they can't interpret, it's kind of pointless, you know. But if you have, like, a part of the Kentucky story too was that they brought in an analytics guy to help present and interpret the data in a way that was understandable, which I think all teams probably have that now. And then the P3 stuff, fantastic. That was probably my favorite part. And the prescription stuff, and like I said, I'm a big fan of physical therapy. My husband just, like, after surgery went to acute physical therapy place, and it's just extremely efficacious in my experience. So this is along the same lines of like but they're doing it a pre-prescription, right? They're doing it to address something that could become a problem, not something that is a problem and you need to get it better. They're saying, oh, you favor your left side, so we're going to have you do all these right side exercises so that you don't blow your knee out or whatever. And then the Suns training team stuff is legendary, and I've heard that before. I knew that about Shaq, that his ankles were completely gone, and he went to the Suns, and they were able to get him able to play games again. And he played a significant number of games that year, and same with Grant Hill. So I found that to be really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think, if they want to spend money, if the Kings have money to spend, I mean, there's no salary cap on stuff like P3 and scouting and analytics. I mean, you can't buy up a whole bunch of $50 million players, but you can spend as much as you want on these things. So
and
the money
on physical therapy, on trainers,
right.
I mean, which is part of the coaching staff, maybe, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, the fact that the Kings won the best training staff, or I don't know what the exact award was, is encouraging, but you wonder how much of it was just that they kept the team. Well, I guess they didn't keep the team healthy. They kept them playing through injury, right? I mean, there still was broken fingers and so blah blah blah. We talked about this already, the Vlade stuff, pre-Vlade, and the path of data in an organization is only valuable if it can potentially reach its end goal. Yeah. And then this one really stuck out to me, and I know we've read it in a bunch of other books too, like the Thinking Basketball and stuff like that, but that good teams win by a lot, right? Good teams blow other teams out. Good teams have a huge margin, and they usually rank really high in offensive, defensive, and pace. And then he gives like this big rundown on the Warriors and how they were like first in offense, first in defense, and close to the top in pace. Whoops. And then this is where the Atlanta discussion happened as well, which I found the Atlanta discussion to be really interesting because it was Wes Wilcox, number one. They had a no-star system, which I think obviously we have a star in De'Aaron, but we have we have like a hybrid system. It hasn't really been working that great the last couple games, but and then it's like a DHO-based multiple playmaker system, right? It fell apart in the playoffs, and then there was like a bunch of stuff that happened behind the scenes with like Danny Ferry and people getting busted for being racist, basically. And so there was a ton of like turnover after this great team. And I think Bud even was like moved on to a whole new team after it. But I found the discussion really interesting. And this is where they talk more about Kyle Korver and what he can do, and the fact that he was also a really good playmaker at that point. Seeds of Bud's approach, cribbed from pace and shooting approach fashioned by the latest Spurs teams, started to get planted during his initial campaign in 13-14, but a season-ending injury to de facto center Al Horford, the team's MVP, and poor man's Duncan in terms of his understated impact on both ends, helped undermine that season. Getting Horford back in 14-15 was huge, but all of the players having a second season in Bud's system created a multiplier effect that made the Hawks into a surprising force. So I put this in here because I read it and I thought, God, I hope that happens for the Kings.
Exactly what I thought when just reading that just now.
Now, having said that, and after having watched the game yesterday, it's kind of like, oh, seriously? But I still have hope. And I'm a little concerned about the changes that they've made to the system and the fact that they haven't added in any, like, you know, like there's no one coming back from injury kind of thing. But we'll see, obviously.
Yeah, I think the most notable change this year is just Keegan's increased role in it. You know how they're trying to make him do stuff that he wouldn't have tried before. But I mean, the
good point.
The last game really was they're trying to put a square peg into a round hole. De'Aaron Fox is a different player than Mitchell. So like the game style didn't work out when the starters were disastrous without Fox.
I mean,
I hope they just slide Monk up in the starting line in the future. I mean,
I honestly think that this happened last year though too.
Yeah.
You remember the game in Indiana when they started David, because I think De'Aaron was having a baby.
Yeah.
Or he was in Houston or something. And they started Davion, and the same thing happened where the starters could not shoot a fucking brick in the ocean. Like they can't. It's not just De'Aaron's gravity though. It can't possibly be just De'Aaron's gravity. I don't think. I think it's
pace. The last like the Davion's incredible, and he's been playing great as a starter, but then his slower pace slowed down the game for everyone else. They're not getting as good looks, and
that game yesterday was like almost unwatchable.
It was.
Yeah, and I don't like. I'm the biggest Davion Mitchell fan there is, but he's not been good this year, in my opinion, thus far, because he hasn't been able to defend without fouling. So that's automatically a failed defensive possession if it ends in foul shots, right?
Yeah.
And then additionally, he's had a lot of turnovers for the minutes that he's played. Mm-hmm. Now, I thought he played fantastic in the Warriors game where he started. But you're right, the pace, and I don't know if it's just him. I think Colby also is that slower pace. And they had Colby running the second unit. So anyways, we'll see what ends up happening.
They'll figure it out. Well, I hope they figure it out.
I mean, all of this solves itself if guys are making shots too.
Yeah,
I mean, to me, that's like the biggest part of it is nobody could like buy a 3-point shot, including Houston, which made it that much more frustrating to watch. Is like this team.
The third quarter was so ugly.
You're beating yourselves by just absolutely like not figuring something else out besides, I mean, and they literally like couldn't chase anything on the perimeter down to defend it like at all, which kind of started with Harrison, sadly. But anyways, okay, moving on. Hopefully there are brighter days. And then I thought this was also interesting in terms of the gravity. I know we've talked about gravity, like again, thinking basketball, talk about gravity and what the effect of it is. And I do think that De'Aaron's gravity has a massive effect, like yesterday, on them being able to make those initial 3-point shots. It's not necessarily even about being wide open. It's about having guys focused on something totally different, right, in the game. So SportVU data, Korver's right at the absolute top of the NBA in terms of highest gravity score, meaning that his primary defender leaves him to help defensively less than any other player in the league. Even if Korver doesn't get the ball in a possession, the defense is effectively stuck chasing him around and defending the rest of the Hawks 4-on-4, which provides more space and creates additional headaches for the opponent in their defensive coverages. Again, like this is kind of why I said Steph as like an extension of this perfected player Like you can't not guard Steph, right? He probably has like the most gravity in the modern game of basketball that there is, right? So and I do think it makes a big difference, especially in a pace and space game. I don't even know what this one is. Oh, I just what he was saying. Like, there's all these different ways to like make a good team and to find good talent, right? And good teams use all of them. So they draft well, they develop well, they trade for good fits. And they find perfect free agents. And like this goes back to sort of the Chris Middleton thing and mid-range theory. Miles, I'm doing a podcast. Can you not blow your nose right there? Sorry. My son is sick. And I don't even think that like all good teams are even good at all of these. Like, but I do think hitting on a couple of them can make a huge difference. For like drafting Clay, for instance, can make a gigantic difference in terms of like the long-term success of a team. And he talked a lot about like these kind of like stars in their role kind of players like Bogut, Middleton, Harden. Well, Harden is really a superstar. He talked about Vucevic being like that perfected, like the embodiment of the stats that he was talking about before, the embodiment of those college stats, the rebounding percentage and the blocks. And then he was just coming into the league. So he was saying, this guy looks like he's going to be really, efficient according to this evaluation model. And then he talked a lot about Channing Frye, whose career probably like took quite a dive after a cliff right after this book came out. But still, Channing Frye was really good. Channing Frye is actually I think he's an assistant coach on Dallas right now, and he's working with Derek Lively, I just saw, which is kind of cool. So yeah, then the shot blocking, rebounding, and assists is the most translatable stat from college. And I think it's Channing Frye who he talks to in this chapter about like figure out what your niche is and then get better at it, right? If your niche on the team is rebounding, just be the best rebounder you can be, right? And how he talks about it, about getting paid. Like if you can find the stat that's your stat and then you can market it, you can basically make a lot of money in the NBA, even though you're not a star, right? But you can do the thing that like, other people are not good at on the team. Kyle Korver, I think we've talked about a lot, but so many of these things, it's like some random thing, an injury, a mistake, some random guy, some random girl, whatever, like led to massive change, So for him, it was this tennis elbow. Like he couldn't play basketball because he got like an injection in his knee or something like that. So he went and shot tennis balls and he got tennis elbow. So he had to keep his elbow in when he was shooting. So he changed his whole shooting form to adjust to this random thing that happened, but it made him a better shooter. So he sort of like got obsessed with like, what are these little tweaks that you can do to like just make you that much better, right? And like, and then the anecdotes that he told about like his family Christmas game where they would always do the extra pass and the coach that yelled at him because he didn't step back a step to take a 3 instead of a 2. And the P3 stuff after he had an injury. And so it's like, exactly like you said, John, like taking advantage of all of the avenues that are available to you to maximize your potential. And then the very last was the Warriors coming out to play. And this, I think we already pretty much said, like the part that I found most interesting about this was the talk about LeBron's load during this series. And then they he talks about how they replaced Bogut with Andre Iguodala because the guy who was like playing music at the practices was like, well, why don't you just put somebody in who can move, who can like guard who they're playing. And so they just put Andre Iguodala in, and that was like the answer. Like, and then Bogut played like 3 minutes in the whole series, and from there on out, the Warriors went on to win it. They won like every game after that, after they slotted Andre in over Bogut and like got rid of the big man, which is the modern sort of like small ball thing. So I thought this was interesting, partially because they give Iguodala a lot of credit over, in some of the other books, it's been Draymond, which I'm sure it's a combination, right? But I just thought it was interesting in that sense. That might be all I have. Yeah, and that's the whole book. Phew. Sorry. Talked
Okay.
a lot there. So yeah, I mean, it was a little dry.
Yeah.
Not as much of like an engaging narrative as most of the other books that, the story books that we've been reading, but I still think it had a really interesting, relevant information that I'm thinking about as I'm watching basketball, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any last thoughts?
Kind of glad to be done with it, to be honest.
Yeah, I read it in like 25-page increments, and I finished it early, but it was a bit of a slog for sure.
Yeah, the beginning of that book was really rough. I basically didn't want to read it. Yeah, but
I can't imagine listening to it. To me, like listening to something like this would be even worse. Like,
yeah, it was terrible.
Because you can't, like, for me,
Yeah.
like I've had so much going on in the background of my life, like right now, that at least when I'm reading, I can like zone out on it a little bit. And like I guess when you're listening, you can too, actually.
No,
But then if
when
you
I'm
get too
I'm
zoned out,
usually
you're like, what?
driving I go through these books while I'm driving.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
why I listen to audiobooks.
Yeah.
So yeah, I zone out, listen, pay attention to that while staring at the road. And that's why I generally prefer the storybooks, because it's something to keep my mind going when I'm stuck in traffic. But yeah, I mean, I think this one was just like weirdly written. Well, not so much about it being dry, just so much as the way it was written in certain elements was just like, like comes off as like an ad.
I totally agree. The P3 stuff and the second spectrum synergy chapter, those 2 chapters for me, I was like, is he trying to sell me this stuff or like what? I mean, I appreciated it, like I said, more when there was like response to it later on in the book.
Yeah.
But yeah, listening to it like off the top, I was like, and why is he I like the whole thing about like, oh, just go up from Stearns Wharf and there you are at P3.
That's like overly detailed in parts it doesn't need to be detailed at all.
Yeah, what? Like, I'm not like driving there. Like, anyways. Well, do you guys have any ideas for next one? If you want to do a next one?
My idea in general is some kind of story type book.
I agree.
The ones I want to avoid, of course,
Oh, wait.
We can do the 17th of December.
What's that?
17th of December.
Yeah, that looks about right to me.
Give ourselves some extra time. Yeah.
Or the 10th or the 17th.
I'm okay with either.
Okay,
yeah,
17th.
Same here.
Let's do 17th.
Okay.
Blood in the Garden on the 17th.
Plenty of time.
Wait. I wish I could put this calendar in here somehow.
It's kind of interesting that Pat Riley's had three kind of versions of himself. Of course, he's been mostly now a GM at Miami over the course of his whole career there.
Yeah, but everyone associates him with those Lakers teams, right?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess he was most successful there, you would say.
The
right? 5 titles as a coach.
The 10th is the day after the in-season tournament ends, so probably better to do the 17th.
Okay, that's a good point. Yeah, I like having a little extra time too. I mean, I read fast, and I've been reading it, like I said, in like 25-page increments, but I just have a lot of shit going on over the holidays and stuff too.
Yeah.
What? Okay, we're good. I will make the event and share it with you guys. And yeah, thank you.
Sounds good. I'd love to do these. These are always fun.
I totally agree. I think they're a blast. Yeah. And I feel like I've learned so freaking much.
Yeah.
Okay,
Definitely.
cool. Night, guys.
Night.
Okay.
See you in a month and a week. Or something like that.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.